Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I hope I'm going live about now. Hopefully, no tech issues or anything else today. Today is the stream that honestly I was kind of hoping I could integrate into something else. But given that Christmas is right around the corner and I honestly don't know how and when I have time, and I don't know what other Apple news leaks or rumors might still come out, maybe none. Therefore, still making every video I make essentially this video. Well, I really wanted to cover with you all of the crazy, I mean, when I say all, it's like 3 or 4, but all the leaks and rumors about the iPhone 17 camera layout or camera island, as we discuss, or however else you want to call it. And it's been a very interesting back and forth between the initial leaks, then some common sense, basically counter reporting on that. It also, everything flowed together with like, is it aluminum? Is it titanium? Is it part that? Is it part that? Right? So it all became like a really complicated thing. And over time, we were kind of like, you know what? Maybe there is like a new camera design. Maybe it's part of a new like glass metal hybrid body, like the render that you see here. And then some people were like, no, 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 titanium is still happening because obviously Apple can advertise the shit out of titanium in comparison to aluminum. And then people were like, well, the visor design just ain't happening. Like they aren't just blatantly copying Google Pixel. And now we are a little bit of an impasse because pretty reputable sources, at least as reputable as you can get when you're primarily like Weibo leakers, are saying contradictory things. And I really wanted to cover with you guys what any of this could mean. I've already tried to give some breakdowns on why I think like a metal chassis could make more sense, why aluminum has some benefits over titanium. I've outlined that the unidistant camera positioning in the triangle layout that we currently have in the camera island really isn't entirely necessary. There are also some pros and cons when it comes to spatial video recording, which currently Apple relies on like a main camera here and an ultra wide there. So again, it's a very, very messy situation. And part of that has also to do with that people are just blindly speculating about the reasons for all of it and about the technical capabilities of a system that would look like that, right? What would be the compromises if Apple switches from like the current layout between the main and the ultra wide? Would spatial video go away? Um, could Apple enable something crazy with this new camera positioning? What about the internal layout? Does it give them dramatically more internal space for like the processor and cooling around it? What about like networking, speakers, and Face ID systems that would clash a little bit with the cameras if they were positioned right on top? Would the cameras maybe be slightly downwards so you could at least put a finger on top of them? So, a lot of stuff that honestly I don't think anybody has a really great answer for. I've already outlined several times on the channel, but I believe that by January and February, we should be starting to get some decent leaks, quote unquote decent. And by that, I mean that Apple will be just much further along in the validation process, in the prototype building process, where devices are basically final because they will soon have to start hitting mass production if they want to hit like September or even October deadlines. But for now, there is still this era of mystique around what exactly we are going to see. And to me personally, the most interesting thing about all of it is what can Apple actually make out of a new design? And friends of the channel, who I sometimes agree with, sometimes disagree with, Rosa, welcome to the chat. Max Tech, Max and Vadim Yurif have done a video on what they believe the master plan of this new iPhone 17 Pro design could be. What's interesting here is I have no idea why YouTube chose to translate half of the title here. I really have no idea. Like, I guess my stuff works in German, so it just decided to say geniale rather than genius. But it's still the correct video. I checked. This really creeped me out. This particular choice by YouTube. Guys, before we get fully started into the reaction here, again, today is not a long video. It's really only something I wanted to get off my chest. Just wanted to have something on my channel that covers this topic. As always, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. Like the video, share it out with anybody who you think might enjoy it. Comment. I love interacting with a lively live chat. I love seeing your suggestions afterwards. And of course, you can become a channel member right here on YouTube. Shout out to Angelica, Steve, and Max Maximus are all MarkTech Pro Max supporters right here on YouTube. You can also become a supporter over on Patreon. And whenever you catch me live, you can send a small donation in the form of a super chat or a super sticker. However you want to support this channel, directly, indirectly, just watching and liking. It's all very much appreciated, and I'm very glad to have all of you here. So without further ado, let's jump into Apple's geniale camera master plan and what it means for the iPhone 17 Pro and future iPhones. By the way, you can already see that everybody's using different renderers. So this one would actually, this is very much a Google Pixel copy where the cameras are not positioned right at the very top, but there would be like about a finger wide of a different distance between the very top and then the camera island. But you can see that this is a horizontal camera arrangement. Also in alignment with the Pixel, it has like the flash, and well, the flash here I believe has like a thermometer. So for Apple, it would be their 3D time of flight sensor right here. So this is very much a Google Pixel design. It also goes counter to some of the exact rumors that we've heard that suggested that this would be a rounded rectangle, right? This is very much an oval with, yes, straight lines here, but this is an oval. So whenever people are showing you this, then you know that they're basically just doing a Google Pixel inspired design. This is not a concrete leak. Then below that, we have a cutout out of glass that would allow for some better radio frequency transparency, of course, to allow for wireless charging, and for MagSafe accessories beyond wireless chargers, including stuff, of course, like the MagSafe wallet, which would basically fit here perfectly. Whether or not this kind of like rounded rectangle would scale with the entire chassis of like the Pro Max or the Pro, we don't know. Again, take everything right now with a grain of salt. All the things that are being covered currently are highly speculative. So let's see what the MaxTech guys had to say and why they think this could lead to a genius camera master plan from Apple.
Leaked iPhone 17 Pro design, and if this looks a little bit strange to you, you're not alone, because these are some of the most controversial renders of all time.
A small counter to that, we had that fidget spinner design. By the way, speaking of fidget spinner, there is of course the guy who made that fidget spinner thing. Okay, Benjamin Netanyahu, okay, whatever. Those weird recommendations today from Twitter. But yeah, I just wanted to show you, like, there is, of course, the new wave of design. This is coming from the source Instant Digital, who is basically the latest to chime in on the entire saga. And he basically suggests that we would keep the triangular camera placement. And what people are now discussing is, does that mean that, well, we are getting like a square around a triangle similar to what we have right now? Or would it mean we would have like a rectangle, a rounded rectangle, a squircle, whatever, basically from one side to the other, which of course you can see would leave a lot of empty space, which Honestly, it doesn't look like great design to me. Now, there are potential for weird triangular designs here, of course. You could have a camera here, and a camera here, or something like that. But yeah, right now, we simply don't know. This has been also another speculation that maybe we would then have flash and the 3D time of flight sensor on the other side. I don't know what the exact benefits would be, given that, I mean, they fit very nicely around the camera here, top and bottom. I mean, that's how it currently is and how it currently works very fine. Now, when it comes to the horizontal lineup, where all of this would be cameras from left to right, honestly, it would require a big internal redesign to make use of all the internal space that is partially covered up now, partially freed up, depending on, of course, where you look inside the chassis. And we haven't yet actually heard rumors that that was going to happen with the Pros. We've heard some rumors that that could happen with the 17 Air, but don't forget, the 17 Air is supposed to only have one camera, right? And the benefit of one camera is, even if you place it in a what would previously be considered like a weird spot, that single camera, it doesn't matter whether it's horizontal or vertical, which, by the way, probably means we are not getting spatial video recording on the iPhone 17 Air, which is, of course, a big bummer given that it was introduced across the entire iPhone 16 lineup, on the cheaper models too, not just the Pros. Or Apple just goes with a brand new camera sensor that we aren't aware of that would bring such functionality to that smartphone. But regardless, with a 17 Air with one singular camera, you know that it doesn't really matter. Like, you would never do like a left to right cover for one camera. You would probably never even do that for two cameras, even if they were like positioned left and right. And then well, I guess you could create a line, right? One camera, two camera, LED flash, 3D sensor, microphone, maybe one other microphone or something like that. Maybe like that. We've had basic also layouts a little bit similar to that on a few more experimental Android phones. Those phones sometimes got like a secondary display on the back, so for selfies and stuff like that. Usually for that these days we have foldables, but it's just interesting to think of all the different opportunities and just the mess that could be caused. Apple is, for all their flaws, Apple is not a redesign for the cause of redesign company. Yes, they try to make their devices unnecessarily thin and light often, but that's because they see a purpose in thin and light. They believe in extreme portability. They believe in making devices more accessible to all kinds of people who previously wouldn't consider a certain product, right? That being said, this currently solves for nothing. So let's see what the Maxtech guys have to say about what could be done here. I have some counters. This is one of the cases where I don't agree with their genius master plan predictions and analysis. So let's see exactly what they had to say.
Time for multiple reasons, like being a blatant Google Pixel design copy and the camera no longer being able to record spatial video.
So that already, in my opinion, is pretty bullshit. Spatial video for now is 1080p. With both the ultra wide camera and the main camera being 48 megapixel, it doesn't really matter how you position them. You can cut out 1080p out of the sensor and still like logically align them, right? I'm not sure if Apple like just really crops in on the sensor for 1080p in spatial video, or if they like use some downsampling from like a 1440p or 4K image. Obviously, if it's the latter, that makes it a little bit more complicated. But I'm just trying to say, don't believe that Apple is forever limited in spatial video recording just in like in the vertical layout, right? If Apple really wants to, they can get their cameras to record spatial video in horizontal layout. Yes, I understand, and there would be some complications. Would have to be some software workarounds given the current state. Maybe it would prevent Apple from introducing higher resolution spatial video recording, unless they at some point introduce like 200 megapixel cameras or something like that. But we have had those discussions for a long time. For example, when the iPhone 7 Plus was introduced and it was Apple's first dual camera system, basically all of us assumed that portrait mode would forever be exclusive for multi-camera iPhones, right? Obviously, that was not the case. The iPhone XR later got portrait mode despite only having one single camera. Now, single camera iPhones very quickly died out in the premium landscape, but you can go to something like the iPhone SE to see that even without a 3D sensor, even without dual cameras, even without super high resolution cameras, you can still do portrait mode, right? And that, to me, will be the same case for spatial video, right? Like right now, we might be speculating a lot horizontal versus vertical layout, 48 megapixel versus 12 megapixel sensors and stuff like that. But fundamentally, I do believe that Apple can solve around those issues if they really wanted to. I mean, I guess the 17 Air will be much more of a like testing ground for that, because how will they do so with one camera? And that to me is also why I'm honestly like still not sure what exactly the market for the 17 Air will be. With just one camera, I just feel like they're shooting themselves in the foot by not giving it just the most basic 12 megapixel ultra wide. The ultra wide is the least thick camera inside the iPhone already. Like, it's not going to be an issue integrating it. Yes, it takes some space away on the X and Y axis, which means it would eat away some space for the battery, for some cooling and stuff like that. You would probably have to make the device just a bit thicker to compensate for that lost space. But in the Z-axis, if you can fit in whatever could, like Apple's 48 megapixel main camera might look like on the 17th generation, be it the exact same as on the iPhone 16 and 15, or maybe a solution more similar to what we've had on the 16 and 15 Pro models, it doesn't really matter. So again, this is a rant maybe for another time, by the time we know a little bit more about the iPhone 17 Air. But whenever people are like, oh, Apple cannot do that because this component is there, Apple has over time simplified certain hardware features, certain software features. They rely on less hardware, or they rely on different hardware. So whenever people believe that Apple will be unable to implement a feature that they've been perfectly fine implementing before because they made some internal changes, right? Don't take that too seriously. Apple is a big company. They can make sure that whatever works, they want to work, actually works. Now, could there be compromises in terms of like final quality or something like that? Sure, I guess. I never looked in comparisons of whether the iPhone. Well, I know the iPhone XR's portrait mode had some software limitations. I believed it worked on fewer different kinds of objects, because that object had to be at least somewhat recognized by the camera system, rather than just being like, oh, it's literally further away or it's literally closer up. But yeah, that's an entirely different discussion. Let's continue.
Or so you think. Because I've been digging through a ton of leaks and putting the puzzle pieces together, and I'm finally convinced that yes, this design is real and it's absolutely genius, because if I'm right, Apple's about to bring the most wanted camera feature of all time. So let's get started by looking at how these new camera redesign leaks began. Way back in May, the information reported that the new flagship iPhone would have the biggest redesign since the iPhone X, with a bunch of feature changes, like the cameras relocated to the top center instead of the corner, which definitely matches the new renders that we've been seeing. But the weird part at the time was that they claimed that it would have an aluminum chassis, which doesn't really make sense at all, since Apple usually uses premium materials like like stainless steel and titanium for their flagship iPhones. And because of that little detail, a lot of publications assumed that this wasn't talking about the flagship iPhone at all, and they accidentally started mixing up leaks for the iPhone 17 Pro with leaks for the new iPhone Air, which is supposed to be super thin, have
Again, the 17 Air could have its singular camera right here. It wouldn't really matter. I also assume that whatever Apple tries to do with the redesign with the 17 Air would be so comprehensive that they easily account for a slightly different camera placement. It's really the pros where internal space is crucial, because not only do you want like the best cameras, like you probably would want at that point a larger 48 megapixel telephoto, right? You probably would finally want like that 1 by 1.14 main 48 megapixel sensor. Maybe you would also finally want a larger ultra wide, because don't forget, while the iPhone 16 Pro got a 48 megapixel ultra wide, the actual sensor size stayed the same as it was on the 16 Pro. So to me, it's really very complicated here. Like, at least the thickness will not be a concern on the Pro models, because, whew, thank God there have not been any rumors about Apple trying to slim them down for no reason whatsoever. But yeah, of course. And then you have the A19 Pro chip, more memory. There is a promise of improved cooling, especially on the more premium model, like the Pro Max, with a vapor chamber design. The Pro Max model is rumored to have a new like glass arrangement over Face ID and new Face ID hardware to make sure that the dynamic island can actually be shrunk down. So if the camera placement actually goes not quite here, but on the very top, then it would also interfere in thickness with the Face ID system. So that's an entire different can of worms. This is why some people said that Apple plans to actually put the ultra wide at the very center, because as I said, the ultra wide camera is the camera that takes up the least space on the Z axis, and therefore it wouldn't interfere with however thickness is needed for the new Face ID system. That being said, again, we are still very early on in the iPhone 17 coverage. We still don't know if the 17 Air will actually turn out to be the 17 Air that we are currently seeing in leaks and early renders. I highly doubt that any kind of renders we are currently seeing of the Pro models are actual like leaked CAD files, like that are in any way official. If anything, I would believe that they are kind of like mock-ups by like by artists and by leakers, and maybe in the best case by like some case makers. But usually when stuff actually comes from case makers, we know that, like the likes of 95 Mac rumors, they cover that. It's not something we learn later on.
Only one camera on the back, have a 6.5-inch display, and be less expensive than the Pro models, which has recently been confirmed. But the one we're talking about in this video is the one with a triple camera design, being the Pro and Pro Max models. Now, a few months later in November, we got a huge updated leak from the information claiming that all of the iPhone 17 models will be switching to aluminum frames because the back design will be fully redesigned, with the top section being made out of aluminum with a fully aluminum camera bump rather than the
well, that's not really entirely what it says, right? He says it's a fully aluminum camera bump, right? But that's not really what it says. It says a rectangular camera bump. So that very first render that we saw, right, for one, this looks like just a glass like elevation similar to what we have right now, but that's not even the best render. Where is it? No, that's the Air. Nope, that's another weird render. So if you look like at this, right, the material between the actual camera lenses, now it could be colored aluminum here. and that would line up. But what wouldn't line up is actually the fact that this is rounded, this is oval, and I've said time and time again that we are promised a rectangle. But it could also be the same principle as what we have right now, where we have like a soft, like matte finish on the rest of the chassis, and then around the cameras we have glossy glass, basically, right? Whether or not this full bump is made out of aluminum, all the way going around the actual camera sensors, camera lenses, or if this refers to like an elevation in the chassis, and then in between we still have like basically a fully glass system, that we honestly don't know. So I don't know why they try to word it that way. Um, but okay. I guess it's easy to misunderstand. Also, some stuff gets lost in translation because a lot of the things we're covering right now are coming at least partially from like Chinese sources. So I do understand the complicated nature of covering these leaks and rumors, and this is why I wanted to have this stream, why I wanted to cover this relatively early.
That Apple is using right now, and then the bottom half, other than the traditional thread, will be fully redesigned, with the top section being made out of aluminum with a fully aluminum camera bump rather than the traditional 3D etched glass that Apple is using right now. And then the bottom half of the rear will continue to be made out of glass to support wireless charging.
This is, of course, where all these different leaks and rumors come in. Now, this would show basically like a chassis with just one material, right? It could be that this means this is aluminum and this is glass, but you've also seen that others basically are reserving this cutout. Now, I don't know why this cutout is so large or why it would be that large. Like technically for MagSafe you need like the magnets around here and then one alignment magnet down there, but even that you don't need for absolutely every MagSafe accessory. And then down here technically they could go again with aluminum, but that would go against some of the leaks and rumors. So this design is a little bit schizophrenic right now. However, one thing that I like about this from Apple Hub is, in my opinion, I do believe that if Apple has a relatively big cutout for the glass, a cutout that basically goes from left to right for the most part, I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Apple, with a nice matte finish, tries to make it look basically the same as the rest of the aluminum body. Again, we've covered how that chassis could look like. We've covered a lot of leaks here. But yeah, as much as this might be like almost like the actual hardware layout, I do believe that the final product could be closer to this. Again, not talking about the camera island here. We'll get some pros and cons here from the MaxTech guys. Just trying to give you all the details again, because obviously we've covered a few things here on this channel, but it's getting a little bit chaotic with just what all different sources are contributing here.
So after that, we started getting a lot of these awesome looking renders showing exactly that.
Yeah, I think honestly, beyond that, this is again not a rectangle, this is an oval. I know it's not a perfect oval, but you understand what I mean. This is probably the render that I like the most, and the render that actually would get me actually excited about the design. Now, I don't have to get excited about the design, to be perfectly honest. What I care about is actual functionality. Designs have been good enough for me on basically every smartphone for years. I do dislike certain designs, but for example, just yesterday, I went to a shop and tried out the Xiaomi 14 and 14T, and I actually liked how they felt in the hand. And whatever slight asymmetry there was to the bezels, they were so thin that honestly I couldn't really tell the difference at this point. At least like maybe I could get annoyed by it, but given how much money I would save over an iPhone Pro, honestly I don't think I would be able to complain. Now this is the kind of design that to me would actually make a lot of sense, and I've covered it on this channel, where this larger amount of aluminum or metal in general would be good for cooling. The glass would serve its purpose when it comes to allowing for wireless charging. I do not expect that Apple would do plastic here, even though in theory that could probably be the best thing for them to do. Plastic obviously also allows for wireless frequency transparency, for wireless charging, and it would be way, way cheaper than glass. Now, it would be more prone to scratches rather than prone to breaks, which is more of a glass problem. But with a nice matte finish on top, one that tries to create a seamless match between the aluminum and the plastic, it could honestly work pretty well, and it would save Apple a pretty penny to not have to integrate like whatever would be their latest generation of ceramic shield. I apologize, there are constantly like ambulances going next to me, next to my apartment, and my windows are all closed, but they're so freaking loud. So if you could hear them, I really apologize. Yeah, so again, a lot of pros and cons, a lot of interesting choices. This design would definitely rock when it comes to cooling. In comparison to prior iPhones, I would even forgive Apple not doing something like a vapor chamber inside this device, because if they use the exact same amount of internal cooling as on the 16 Pro, then that external cooling could legit improve like the overall heat capacity by like 20, 30, maybe even 40%. Titanium by itself is a bad heat conductor. Glass is a bad heat conductor. So having those materials as the actual materials that face the outside world, that face the cool air that moves on top of it, yeah, that would be a big, big win.
With a cool frosted glass bottom portion, as well as an aluminum camera bump, which looks really similar to the Pixel.
Yeah, and by the way, this one actually does look like aluminum, right? So in the previous one that I've shown from Twitter, it's really hard to tell what exactly they mean by that. Here, it definitely feels like a cohesive piece of aluminum.
Similar to the Pixel. We also got this render, which looks like a supply chain leak, but it's not, and it looks great, helping us imagine why Apple would...
Yeah, so we've covered obviously this chassis. It's not a leak in the sense that it's like a stolen part of the iPhone supply chain. It's basically designed to like visualize what we have discussed. And yes, a compliment to this actual mock-up or 3D print or whatever. This it actually does line up with the description of the initial leak way, way better, right? Because for one, the cameras are at the very top. And it's a rectangle rather than an oval. I know I'm saying that a million times today, but those are the little things that get me going, because at that point you could start really like making anything into like a render once you ignored like some very clear wording here, right?
Switch to aluminum, since the titanium would be way too expensive to use that much for the entire...
No, it would legit be bad for that kind of use case though. Like now you're really shooting yourself in the foot, because you're adding a lot of cost for very, very little material benefit. And this is where aluminum, honestly, because it would be closer to like a unibody, actually comes in. And while it is lighter and while it is less durable than titanium, if you use a little bit more of it volumetrically and you just focus on the strength of that base almost unibody design, in my opinion, you could replicate a lot of the current benefits of titanium. Not maybe necessarily for like scratch resistant when your phone actually falls down and you scuff the edges, but for everything else, from how your phone bends or breaks to, of course, all the benefits that where aluminum always wins anyway, like heat transfer.
camera bump and it just wouldn't make that design work. So aluminum is definitely the better option, and it's better for heat dissipation as well. And then just a few days ago, Weibo leaker Digital Chat Station confirmed that the supply chain materials they have seen appear to confirm that this new camera module design is real.
And that, of course, if we go back to our initial coverage here, is what is now being actually challenged by another Weibo source. So the initial thing, well, the thing that basically confirmed it came from Digital Chat Station. But now Instant Digital, who previously leaked the yellow iPhone 14 and the landscape front-facing camera on the iPad Air M2, disputes this, saying, my source told me that the appearance of the back has indeed changed, but the layout of the three cameras is still triangular, not the horizontal bar spread on the internet now. And again, I am saying there could be crazy ways to make it still triangular, though at that point it would be very weird if it was still like more horizontally aligned, rather than just being in one corner. If anything, and I honestly don't know how that would look like, right? But imagine like the current basically square design, right, with the triangular layout, but it's in the center, right? And basically then the entire redesign aesthetic of the iPhone 17 generation, or at least of the Airs and Pros, I mostly assume that the regular iPhone 17 model would probably still follow the design language of the iPhone 16 and 15. That's probably the most efficient thing to do, for given that you already have like the supply chain for all of this. But you could have like that triangular layout right here, right? I honestly don't know what the benefits would be. I mean, I guess Apple could have a very long and then slightly misshaped motherboard here. But it's honestly hard to tell. Apple definitely. By the way, I don't even think that Apple is facing so many big challenges here. If anything, I think the Air is the most challenging model, and it definitely won't have problems with its camera alignment if it only has one camera. But I do believe that maybe this is just like a misguided thing from like different prototypes that have leaked maybe at different times in the development schedule, and Apple is like, oh yeah, you know what? We've internally decided on one. And leakers are like, well, but here are the 10 different prototypes and all their pros and cons that have ever existed, because those leakers might not yet know which design is actually the final one. Yeah, crazy situation.
Module having an elongated oval shape. And that's exactly what renders from Russian YouTuber Wilsacom showed, with an elongated black glass camera bump.
Yeah, though leaks from sources like these, like I know these guys obviously have some supply chain sources. That's how they got like the M4 Max. Like they basically bought them from supply chain stealers, not even leakers. But that being said, there's a remarkable difference between knowing someone who can get you a finished built product a week or two in advance, and a big difference to, oh, I know what prototype Apple has actually decided upon.
But I personally think that these renders make more sense, because the information said that the camera bump is aluminum and not glass. So I think that each camera lens...
I mean, that's not really what it says. The aluminum nature of the camera bump could just refer to the fact that it's not the glass that grows out of other glass, because that's what's currently happening on like the iPhone 16 Pro design. Here we would basically have an aluminum rail around it and then just glass position in between. I don't think that either leak just says one is right over the other. Tippermaster joining the chat saying, for years people said that the triangle was to make sure any to any lens transition was smooth and equal distance. What happens to that now? In series, it will still be linear, so I guess that covers most of it. Well, the issue is, I guess, is that the benefits of the triangular design, they are definitely still there, but I wouldn't say that they're as important as they once were. I mean, in theory, Apple could use a very small, like, digital zoom on the cameras. Maybe they could use even like something like a 50 megapixel sensor, which they utilize, quote unquote, only 48 megapixel. And even that ever so slight zoom on the sensor could allow for slightly smoother transitioning, because similar to how if you zoom in on a smaller part of the sensor, you can actually stabilize pretty well, right? Because or you can work around the edges much better. That being said, the cameras are very fast. There's a lot of AI going on these days, so they could honestly predict some of what the other camera would even be showing. They could even make the cameras maybe run more simultaneously to make sure that the switch happens absolutely like seamlessly. And quite honestly, if this layout actually allowed for more battery, better cooling, and all that stuff, I do believe that Apple would compromise a tiny bit on like camera transition speed to allow for those other benefits, to market a new design and things like that. So I'm not saying that this is much better, nor am I saying this is worse. It's just different, and different can be better if Apple says, oh, our engineers feel very comfortable with this design. They rearrange the internals. Some parts that were further apart are now closer together, makes them easier to cool. Some other parts that were too close together are now further apart, maybe spacing out some extra heat generation and some other components. So but again, we don't actually know how much the internal layout changes because of that. We know that for a while, Apple has worked, for example, on different materials for motherboards, and they've worked on all kinds of different 3D stacking technologies to make the motherboard as small as possible. But whether or not this has anything to do with like differently placed cameras, I couldn't tell you.
Will be split up into its own bump like this, and I think it makes more sense for two reasons. Number one is that the bump will have steps in thickness like it has right now, so it won't just be a huge, thick, oval bump, but only the smaller bumps will stick out more. And number two is that
I don't honestly wait. Wait, that's not even true. Apple could make those bumps as thick. Wait, that's not true. Like, where's the design? Where's the aluminum design? Here, right? Like, it doesn't matter if it sticks out of glass or it sticks out of aluminum. Like, they can make this glass one thickness and then the cameras another thickness. They don't have to be one part of a cohesive material to allow for that. This is way too much like limiting Apple's capabilities. Like, Apple can make some crazy stuff out of material. Like, no, they can make the cameras taller than the main bump. Still, they can make the bump as thick as the cameras. I know that would make the bump really, really thick, and that could really rub people the wrong way visually. I personally would probably prefer it, though I'm not sure. So I don't think there are any architectural differences between this bump and this bump when it comes to allowing for the thickness.
and I think it makes more sense for two reasons. Number one is that the bump will have steps in thickness like it has right now, so it won't just be a huge, thick, oval bump, but
Well,
only
for one, it was never rumored to be oval. It was rumored to be a rectangle. No idea why everybody's reversing to the oval.
smaller bumps will stick out more. And number two is that Apple uses very expensive sapphire glass for their camera bumps, since
Nope, artificially made sapphire is not that expensive. There's like Apple does he think that this is sapphire, the rest of it too? The lens covers could and probably will still be sapphire. That has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the design.
they don't scratch as easily as regular glass, and it's honestly a must-have for camera bumps. So making
What? Why? What do you mean camera bumps? Right now it's only on the lenses. It's not on the entire like squircle.
a huge oval piece of sapphire glass
It doesn't have to be. You can make that bump aluminum for one thickness and then still have the camera stand out. That's not how it works. Nobody forces Apple to make the cameras equal thickness to the overall bump. Who said that? The cameras can still stick out, and the cameras could use a different cover material. Apple could use aluminum here, glass here, then glass for most of the bump, and then further elevated camera lenses with metal rings around them. Wait, why does he think that wouldn't work?
Way too expensive. So this is what I think the final design will look like.
Wait, what? That doesn't even make sense. Like, when you look even at what Apple has done, like iPad Pro M1, right? Here, even on my iPad, I have it right here. I can show it to you guys. Right? This camera bump, right, is inside an aluminum chassis overall. It is a metal bump around it. Then there is glass inside, not sapphire or anything. And then there are individual camera bumps still inside. Now, these cameras mostly line up with the rest of the bump, but they actually still protrude a tiny bit. So I have no idea why he believes that they have to be part of one continuous bump. Is Jerry Rick still on his wrong conspiracy about fake sapphire? Is it like wrong for him to say it's fake sapphire? Honestly, don't know. To be like, I'm not a engineer in that regard or a physicist, I guess. Whatever sapphire Apple is working with, we know it's artificially created sapphire, right? We know that artificially created sapphire, depending on the process that you're using, is not as hard as sapphire that you find in nature. You could get it to that. That makes it usually more expensive. The other part is, though, you probably don't want it to actually be the hardest possible like sapphire, because you don't want those camera, you want still a mix of scratch and break resistance on the camera lenses, right? You probably favor break resistance over scratch resistance here because sapphire is already hard enough, so you'll just try to work around it. Break resistant means it be a little softer. And so whether or not that means it's fake sapphire, I honestly couldn't tell you. Like, I guess I could look it up. Artificial versus natural selection. Yeah, that too. Sapphire. Wait, I was right. I wanted to type in double P. Simulite Sapphire looks mostly flawless and has next to no inclusions. And then for the check is blah, 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 blah. Please don't tell me this is just bullshit from like websites. Does lab created sapphire mean fake? No, lab sapphire has the same mineral makeup as natural sapphire and this real sapphire. Lab sapphire is visually identical to high quality natural sapphire. Okay, Jesus Christ. Artificial is fine. That's used in most watchmaking. It's just that he seems to take off a coating and says it's way too soft when the underlying layer is fine. Oh, that could also be true, to be honest. There is, of course, an anti-reflective coating on top of that, too. So that's a different consideration, which I guess at that point, it's a little bit like the problem with like ultra fine glass on foldables, right? Whether you still have a little bit of a protective layer on top. So would you say that ultra fine glass is not harder than plastic because you still have to have a layer of plastic on top of ultra thin glass? I always mix it up. Is it ultra fine or ultra thin glass? Ultra thin glass. Ultra thin glass? Is it ultra fine glass? Samsung, I guess. Oh, Jesus Christ. It's so am I mixing up some weird branding here? No, ultra thin glass innovation. Okay. I don't know why ultra fine. Is there another branding that is ultra fine? I could swear there is, but yeah, at least we now remember the correct branding for foldables. Let me get back to the actual video.
But there's only one problem with this new camera design, and it's actually a big problem. Big enough to make some people think that these leaks are all fake. But don't worry, I figured it out, and Apple's gonna solve this by introducing the most genius, innovative camera feature of all time.
Okay, it should be noted he's saying that without any leak or rumor behind it, or he's not referring to any sources. So while I know that, for example, this year, the MaxTech guys have been right in predicting that we would get M4 earlier than most expected, right? For example, on the iPad Pro. That being said, that of course still contrast with like half a dozen to a dozen leaks and rumors that they've covered where they made the wrong prediction based on stuff we got early. So the fact that they were right on M4 doesn't mean they will be right on everything. Just trying to make sure. Jesus, what is going on? There are like ambulances going by every couple of minutes.
And that big problem that Apple's gonna solve is that this design seemingly does not support spatial video recording. This was actually a big enough deal that Apple completely redesigned the camera bump on the iPhone 16 to make sure—
It should be noted that was never really stated. Like, now there is a difference that obviously the previous design was actually a weird diagonal design, which most people never like to begin with. Now we still, from everything that we understand that this like vertical layout is probably much better for spatial video recording, but we have never gotten confirmation that it's an end or be all like disqualifier. I mean, we've only had spatial video since the iPhone 15 Pro. Even if it's currently a limitation, doesn't mean that it will forever be a limitation.
That the two rear cameras align side by side when you record video horizontally.
Yeah, of course, I should be noted. When I say vertical layout, I mean vertical layout while you're holding your phone in portrait mode. If you're holding in landscape, that means it's in it's in horizontal layout
to support spatial video recording. But what if there is a way that you can make this new leaked rectangular camera bump support spatial video recording? Well, are you ready for this? What if you could hold your iPhone vertically like this, but record horizontal video in 4K resolution at 60 FPS?
By the way, that would already be possible on a 48 megapixel sensor. The reason Apple doesn't do it is because, as anybody who works with cameras, and I know his brother does, like you would usually do a little bit of a zoom in on the main sensor. That's just better for like image stabilization and stuff like that. You could technically already hold up the phone this way and do 3840 by 2160 inside the camera that it has a resolution of 8000 by 6000. So yeah, the reason why Apple hasn't yet done so is if you actually go into your camera app, one thing that you will notice is that one thing that Apple doesn't really play too much with is aspect ratios. Now, they allow you to have 1:1 aspect ratios for photos, but that's, by the way, the only default aspect ratio change that Apple has in the camera app. When you go to actual video recording, you will find that all of those videos are 16 by 9. And in portrait, it records portrait, and in landscape, it records landscape. That's just how it works. Yes, with 12 megapixel cameras, it would limit like your ability to like record in landscape while holding in portrait to 1080p. But on 48 megapixel cameras, you could do it with 4K. Either way, the reason why Apple doesn't do it is because you want a little bit of a camera a zoom in on the sensor. Plus, you also want, by the way, uh, you also just want the logical thinking from people to say, oh, I'm holding my phone like this, so the video will actually come out like this. I'm holding my phone like this, so the video will come out like this. And that way it also lines up with what you're seeing on the screen, right? If you're holding the phone in landscape, you're seeing the video in landscape. If you're holding out your phone in portrait, you're having your preview happening in portrait mode. So yeah, whatever he's saying right now is purely speculation.
Yes. Or even better, what if it could record both vertical and horizontal video at the same time? This right here is the most requested camera feature of all time to solve the age-old problem of trying to figure out if you should shoot vertical video for a special moment so that it's social media friendly, or if you should shoot horizontally to make it more cinematic and TV friendly.
I mean, we all know that at this point you would probably just use like 4K in landscape, and then you would like crop out what would essentially be like 1080p, and you would just go onto the very center on your point of interest. Or if you don't have like a sufficiently high quality camera to cover everything in landscape, you would just go in with portrait right away. It's not that big of a choice. We know TikTok, we know shortcuts prefer portrait mode videos. We know most like YouTube-like content. We know, of course, movies, TV shows prefer landscape orientation content. It's really not that big of a challenge as he pretends it is. Most people creating content understand those things. I believe even the 2 shorts that I've done here on this channel, I believe I made them in landscape, in portrait mode, right? Go to my shorts. Yes, my 2 shorts where I actually used the Memoji face on top. Or an emoji, I guess, in that case, because it's animated. There were portrait mode, and I did it with the FaceTime, the front-facing camera.
To watch later, but why not both at the same time in real time?
The problem is that portrait videos are also usually a little bit zoomed in. They rarely are like what a portrait video isn't. And what I could see actually is a feature coming in, right? You see, like this is like a 16:9 like horizontal video, right? Imagine if this was a 1:1 video, right? A 1:1 aspect ratio, right? So it would be substantially taller. Now that would allow you to still like create a 16:9 or a 21:9 video by zooming in on whatever interests you and still have a very wide cinematic angle. But it would also give you a lot of space on the top and bottom to work with for a portrait video like this, right? So if Apple allows anything, I could see them have 1:1, like basically squared video, similar to how they allow for squared photo taking. But again, this is not backed up by anything, nor does it have anything to do with the alignment of the sensors.
To watch later, but why not both at the same time in real time? So I started trying to figure out how Apple could make this happen, and I thought maybe Apple's gonna switch to using square sensors, which have the same pixel count vertically and horizontally.
That doesn't even make sense, because the 48 megapixel sensors are higher resolution on either axis than a 4K video. A 4K video is 3840 by 2160. A 48 megapixel camera sensor is around 8000 by 6000. You can have a 4K video inside there that is perfect 1:1, no matter where it's horizontal or vertical. Horizontal or vertical? Yeah.
But I had this realization that Apple won't need that at all. For the last couple of years, we've had a really cool camera leak that actually pointed to Apple switching to triple 48 megapixel cameras on the back.
I mean, that's not a big leak. We already have a 48 megapixel main, a 48 megapixel ultra wide, and the only thing that's missing is the telephoto, which we pretty much know is being updated updated to 48 megapixel next year.
Starting with the iPhone 17 Pro. And whether this is a coincidence or not, but that triple 48 megapixel camera design is required to make this work with the new rectangular camera bump design.
No.
Why? Well, because 48 megapixel sensors have 8,000.
By the way, spatial video that we've covered before, like that we've mentioned before, I believe you'll mention that too, only uses the ultra wide and main camera. It has nothing to do with the telephoto, so that already would be like meaningless. And unless he suggests that this feature like needs to be on every single camera on the back simultaneously, like maybe, I guess, but Apple has been pretty fine with offering like some differences between like the different camera sensors. I guess the base feature set is identical, but they could offer this thing already because they already have 48 megapixel ultra wide and telephoto. A big actual like thing that would limit them is like raw performance, because you would essentially have to record 1:1 aspect ratio video
by 6,000 pixels in terms of the pixel count, which is technically enough for 8K video recording. So I always wondered why Apple didn't support 8K video.
Because you cannot do any kind of super sampling. You would have to use native recording. You cannot do bigger zoom that would allow you to have better image stabilization. It would be worse for low light video, using some downsampling from higher resolution down to 4K, depending on what area of the sensor you're actually using. You're very rarely exactly zooming in, by the way, on 3840 by 2160 pixels. You're probably using a larger part of the sensor so as not to lose that much data. And then you're basically downsampling a higher resolution to 4K. Again, it depends from camera to camera, from software solution to software solution. I'm primarily talking about a principle from larger, like mirrorless camera here. A lot of cameras, by the way, like take it as a point of pride that, oh, we only have to zoom in 1.2x to give you 4K downsampled, or some have to zoom in much further, 1.5x or something like that. So yeah, it's nothing that he is saying is technologically a big limit.
Well, now it makes sense if they were planning to add dual video recording all along, which is perfect timing with a triple 48 megapixel camera bump. Because if you think about it, with those triple 48 megapixel cameras, if you hold your phone vertically, you still have enough pixels horizontally to fit 4K video into, since 4K video requires 3,840 pixels wide, which is less than the new 6,000 vertical pixels on all three of the 48 megapixel cameras. Because if you think about it, right now we have a 12 megapixel telephoto camera and its sensor has 4,000 by 3,000 pixels, so it's impossible to record.
That is not true. Apple could oversample. They could record exactly 3,000 by 3,000 on that sensor and still give you what would essentially be 3840 by 3840 as output. Yes, it would be dramatically lower quality than downsampling from a higher resolution, but it would be possible. And by the way, I texted that to Vadim on Twitter, where I took a photo with my 48 megapixel sensor on my iPhone 15 Pro Max, and I zoomed in 3x, right? Obviously, if I zoom in 2x, I have perfect 12 megapixels because I zoomed in to 1/4 of the available sensor area. Now at 3x, I don't have a 3x telephoto on that camera, right? But you know what the output resolution of that camera, of that mode was? It wasn't 1/9 of the resolution of the 48 megapixel sensor. It was still 12 megapixel. And you know why? Simply because Apple wants it to. Now, they don't do really like super complicated upsampling, like which would bring it up to almost 12 megapixel quality, but they just package it as a 12 megapixel file. The same they could do for the current telephoto by just using 3000 by 3000 from the sensor, and then basically packaging it inside of a 3840 by 3840 file. It's really not that complicated. Or 3840 by 2160 if you just want it to be like not actually squared like what I'm suggesting, but actually like portrait. Well, no, it would be. Oh my God, it's such a stupid concept to begin with. I'm getting confused. But it would basically be 3000 times 2000 landscape. So yeah.
Horizontal 4K while holding it vertically, since 3000 pixels is less than 3840, so it wouldn't work. And since
it absolutely would work. And you don't even have to do some crazy AI upsampling. That's just not how it works.
Apple wants everything to be seamless, they wouldn't want you to only be able to record this way with only the main and ultra wide while disabling the telephoto.
I mean, they could, but I guess that's his biggest argument, right? Apple wouldn't want it to make it exclusive to the ultra wide and the main camera.
That's why they're waiting until they have all three of the rear cameras have 48 megapixel sensors so that you can record.
By the way, like, do I need to remind you guys that these are the same guys who predicted that Apple would basically guaranteed switch to 8K video
4K
recording?
video with any lens while holding your phone vertically. And if you think about it, the new A19 Pro chip is going to be fast enough to support dual video recording because it's basically already fast enough to shoot HDR, which combines multiple frames in real time to improve HDR, or same thing for recording 4K video at 120 FPS. You're basically using double the processing power.
Oh, by the way, yeah, like limitations. Does 4K 120 on the 16 Pro work on like the other sensors? Like I thought it was a main it was exclusive, and I thought it was also zooming in actually quite a bit on the sensor. 4K 120 16 Pro Max. Limitations? Is it only possible on the ultra wide? Is it only possible on the main sensor? Oh, by the way, they've already had storage. They've already had limitations on features like the 128 gigabyte versions weren't able to record higher resolution ProRes videos. 16 Pro Max in 4K only on the main 1x lens. So even by bringing up that 4K 120 recording, they already contradicted themselves, because Apple allows for you to record at 4K 120, but only allows that on the main camera. Like there already are discrepancies here.
So Apple can simply record 2 video streams at the same time with the same.
It would be meaningless to record 2 video streams. You would probably want to record just 1-to-1. Like
lens,
1x1
one vertically and one.
I know, by the way, 1x1 aspect ratio video recording does have with some other issues. I know people call it out to me, like there would be some problem with like if you move the camera very quickly and how the camera adjusts to that and stuff like that. I'm not an expert here, just saying from a purely is it possible perspective, it would make more sense instead of having a dual video stream where some parts of the video even overlap. It would make way more sense to have just a 1x1 output and then basically allow you to customize afterwards. Like, do you want to create a portrait mode or a landscape mode video? Or maybe Apple could even allow you to automatically split it into 2 afterwards.
Horizontally at 60 FPS, and it'll use the same amount of processing power and storage as 4K 120. They just really need
That's, by the way, also not quite true. Technically, doubling the frame rate doesn't necessarily double the actual size of the file, because usually for double the frame rate, you would have to have some other compromises as well. But yeah, it would work.
A really fast sensor, which they
Yeah.
already have with their super fast Sony sensors, as well as really good software to be able to.
But that's also not true. Not every single sensor they use is exceptionally fast or super modern. Yes, their main sensor absolutely is, but their ultra wide sensor right now, the 48 megapixel one, is not quite super advanced, and it's very likely that the telephoto will just get that same sensor. Now, those sensors would have the benefit of being pretty small, so actually the readout from the sensor can happen relatively quickly. But would it be enough for like data aggregation and stuff like that? Would you really want to compromise potentially on quality and stuff? Oh, I'm not sure.
Pull and combine data from the center where the vertical
Thank
and
you for joining the
horizontal
chat,
recording
Angelica.
overlaps. I think Apple can do it. And they also need to store it properly so that you can edit. And this is actually similar to how Apple allows you to adjust the cinematic video blur in post while editing to change the focus point in real time, which is just genius. So Apple can easily pull off a new editing feature where you click edit on the video and switch between vertical and horizontal video, which it recorded at the same time. And then you can simply airdrop it in the format that you like, and both of them will be full quality 4K. And Apple can even go further by adding automatic subject tracking and cropping to the vertical video so that the final frame can move side to side to accommodate a moving subject within the sensor, which sounds crazy complicated, without having the subject get cut off. That would be absolutely genius, having the sensor and just moving like this to track and basically stabilize a moving subject. That right there is quite literally the only way that Apple can make the new rectangular camera design support spatial video recording while.
No. I mean, that's not even true. Like, by using what already are 48 megapixel ultra wide and main cameras, let's say that's the main, let's say that's the ultra wide, they can actually do that trick he described, and that is putting like a part of the video on like whatever orientation the sensor fits. But that's already possible. That's already possible on the pro cameras, and the telephoto has absolutely nothing to do with spatial video recording anyway. And the 16 Pro and Pro Max already have 48 megapixel on the ultra wide and the telephoto. And they didn't redesign them because they did it. Now on the regular 16, you could argue, well, the ultra wide is actually only a 12 megapixel sensor. However, don't forget that spatial video is only 1080p, and you can fit 1080p inside a 12 megapixel sensor actually just as easily as he described putting in 4K inside a 48 megapixel sensor. That's literally how resolution scales. 1080p is 1/4 of 4K, and 12 megapixel is 1/4 of 48 megapixel. This is such a weird, it's basically grasping at straws, in my opinion.
Spatial video recording while solving the age-old problem of trying to figure out which way to hold your phone to record video. It's absolutely genius, and it'll be an instant upgrade for myself and pretty much anybody out there that cares about cameras if Apple actually goes for it, and I think it's the only way possible. So with that said, let me know your thoughts on this crazy idea.
Okay, guys, as I told you, this was not supposed to be a super long stream. I actually thought I could keep it under an hour. Let's see if there's any if there's anything else here. Nope, not any new leaks or rumors. You can let me know if there's anything you would like me to quickly react to, or if there's anything I've missed. Obviously, most things we do cover pretty quickly on this channel. So Again, Vision Pro being cheaper, that's probably something that I would want to have in a separate stream, not a stream that's primarily focused on one topic. Yeah. By the way, this is also something that I would like to cover at some point, though I do want to read into this a little bit. Like the EU wants Apple to make more interoperable operating systems, which means that like an iPhone would have to be more compatible with like an Google Android Wear OS watch, and probably in return too, like the Apple Watch is also more compatible. Not sure. Usually the iPhone is like the hierarchy most important things here. And but over time we know that, for example, the iPad was initially not labeled as a monopolistic platform holder, but over time was added, and that's why iPad OS 18 supports third-party app stores on the iPad, just as it does on iPhone inside the European Union. So I'll have to see just how intrusive this shit is. I'm not a fan of it. I say I'm a fan of regulation when they actually allow companies to do good work. I think this would be wasteful and actually force Apple's engineers and developers to work on stuff that most of their customers don't even want. So it's more work to actually put out a product that wouldn't benefit their customers, and that I am against. But we did cover the most important leaks and rumors today. Primarily one topic, but you saw there was enough to say about it. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, do the YouTube jazz, subscribe, like, share, leave a comment, become a channel member right here on YouTube, or support Shurova on Patreon. And of course, as always, let me know what you would like to see me cover next. And I'll see you then. This is Mark Tag, tuning out.